So instead of doing a traditional MacBook Pro M2 review, today I want to give you the only reason why you should buy one instead of the M1 MacBooks that are out there at the moment. So the first M2 Mac is here, kickstarting the next generation of Apple Silicon. It looks identical, it's the same design basically that we've had since 2016 on these 13-inch MacBook Pros. So for the unboxing, as you can see, I can't really be bothered. It's the same as the M1 Pro 13-inch. It has the charger, cable, and of course the MacBook Pro. And love it or hate it, it also does have that touch bar still. We have the new M2 MacBook Air that's starting at around about $100 less in the US than this, and it has a slightly bigger screen. It's thinner, it's also lighter, it does have a better webcam and fanless, but we'll get onto that a little bit later on. So why would you buy this MacBook Pro with an M2 chipset inside it? Well, it's to do with one feature, what's on that M2 chipset, what I want to show you. So looking at these GeekBench scores that you can see here, starting off with the single core. So you can see in this chart here, I've basically got all the M1 variant chipsets and I've also got the M2. So at the bottom, you've got the M1 chipset with that 8-core GPU inside it. And then above that, you've actually got the M2 with the 10-core GPU on the GeekBench 5 score that I've done here. And as you can see here, it leaps and bounds ahead in single core performance than any of the other chipsets out there right now, even more than the M1 Ultra. And the main reason behind this, as we know, is that basically with, especially as you can see with the M1 Pro to the M1 Ultra, the single core score is basically the same. And to be honest, even looking at the score here, it's not that far ahead than the actual M1. I know this chart is kind of zoomed in, but just to give you the perspective here, you can see that the M2 chipset is 9% more powerful in single core performance than the M1, and on average it's around about 8% faster than we've got on that M1 Pro, the base model, the 8-core CPU, and also the 10-core CPU M1 Pro and M1 Max, and even that 20-core CPU on the M1 Ultra. But moving over to the multi-core score, and things change even more here. What's quite exciting to see with the M2. We can see the M1's at the bottom, and the M2 is around about 21% more faster in multi-core performance. Remember, Apple did claim it was going to be around about 18% more in overall kind of performance, but in multi-core performance, as you can see here on GeekBench 5, it's 21%. The most interesting thing is the next actual chipset, and that's that M1 Pro with that base 8-core CPU, and it's actually only 6% more faster than the M2 chipset. And that's absolutely amazing. Then that 10-core CPU M1 Pro and Max, remember they share the exact same sort of CPU inside it. It's only 29% more faster than the M1 Pro baseline. And then obviously the M1 Ultra, because it's got that 20-core CPU, it's 96% more powerful than the M1 Pro and the M1 Max with the 10-core CPU. But even moving over to the GeekBench 5 Compute Metal score, and this is more to do with kind of sort of your graphics and your CPUs all working together, you can see here that the M2 chipset with the 10-core GPU, not the 8-core one, it's actually 47% more faster than the M1 8-core GPU. And then the M1 Pro is 22% more faster than what we've got with the actual M2 chipset. Then obviously the M1 Pro, and this is with the 16-core GPU, is 6% more faster. M1 Max 63% faster, and obviously the M1 Ultra over the M1 Max is 46% more faster. But like I said, the main thing to take away is where the M2 chipset sits right now between that M1 Pro, that 14-core GPU baseline chipset we get in the 14-inch MacBook Pro at $1,999, and also the M1 chipset, the 8-core GPU, what this M2 chipset replaces. So we can see that the M2 chipset is faster than the M1, and this was very much expected. But you're wondering still, what is that main reason why you should buy the M2 chipset over the M1? Well, let me show you right now. Something that Apple talked about at WWDC as an extra feature inside the M2 chipset over the M1 is the media engine. Only on the M1 Pro and above has a media engine inside it. So this is a first for the standard M2 chipset to actually get this, because the M1, like I just said, doesn't actually have it. And what I've done here is I've exported an 11-minute video on this MacBook Pro at ProRes, and then basically what I've done is I've done the exact same export on multiple other Apple devices. And let me show you the results right here. So looking at this chart, do remember guys, lower is better. Not higher is better, lower is better. So at the very top here, you can see that the M2 chipset exported this 11-minute video in 362 seconds, whereas the M1 chipset, and remember that has that 8-core GPU, did it in 589 seconds. But what's more amazing is that M1 Pro, that base 8-core CPU, did it in 273 seconds. What isn't really a lot in it. Then the M1 Max did it in 249 seconds, and then the M1 Ultra did it in 239 seconds. You can see that massive difference there between the M2 and the M1, and you could actually argue that the M2 is more closer to that baseline 8-core CPU inside the M1 Pro. Something else that we've also got to remember is there is a video decoder now in the M2 chipset, and this is for H.264 and HEVC as well, and also the M1 chipset variants lack this, but I do expect we'll probably get this inside the M2 Pro and all the other M2 chipset out there, so to even possibly even have multiple decoders inside it. But for video editing on its own, this M2 chipset, in my opinion, is a way better buy than, say, the binned M1 Pro 8-core, as you're getting far more money worth inside this MacBook Pro with the M2 chipset. Yes, I know, with the 14-inch MacBook Pro, you do get a bigger, better screen, better camera, and more ports on that 14-inch model. But just for raw power of that binned M1 Pro, look again here, you can see you're only getting about 6% more power in GeekBench multi-score, and remember on that media export I just showed you, the gap is closer to the M1 Pro than the M1 normal with the brand new M2 chipset with that media engine inside. Also remember, with this MacBook Pro with the M2 chipset, I've only got 8GB of RAM inside this machine, whereas the 14-inch MacBook Pro, no matter what configuration what you have with the M1 Pro inside it, whether this is the bin version or the normal version, it starts with 16GB of RAM, and that's what this export's been done at, and all these Geekbench scores have been done at. It's one with 16GB of RAM inside it. This new MacBook Pro also gives you the full 10-core experience for $1,299. And remember, again, I'll stress it, it's only 6 to 10% slower than the M1 Pro in the Geekbench scoring here of that 14-inch MacBook Pro that costs $700 more. However, for the 13-inch MacBook Pro that I have here, the elephant in the room comes in a few weeks' time. The M2 chipset inside the baseline MacBook Air only has an 8-core GPU at $1,199. But, and here's the big but, if you want the 10-core GPU like in my M2 MacBook Pro, it will only cost you $100 more, bringing it up to the same price at $1,299. So, for the same price, you'll be getting a bigger screen, you'll also be getting a better webcam, you'll also get a thinner and lighter design, you also get MagSafe free on it, and you also get that brand new midnight colour. The only thing that you'll lack on is about sort of 2 hours of battery life compared to the MacBook Pro M2, what gives it that extra little bit more boost of battery life. But to be honest, you know, with that MacBook Air, I would easily trade up 2 hours of battery life for all those extra new features. So overall, if you're desperate for an M2 chipset right now, go ahead and buy the MacBook Pro. And to be honest, even after next month, after the new MacBook Air with the M2 chipset comes out, we all know the stock's going to run out really, really quickly. And let's be deadly honest, the MacBook Air is going to be longer to wait for than this 13-inch MacBook Pro. So basically, get this Pro right now, unless you can be patient and wait for an M2 Air, what may take a couple of weeks or even a couple of months to actually turn up. The other thing to take away from this video is how impressive the M2 chipset is for video editing. don't get me wrong, the M1 chip is still really impressive, and it will be for many years to come. So definitely still do pick this, and also if you do some light video editing, it's still going to be great for that. But the main thing is that we do have a new chipset, what is a competitor to the M1 Pro chipset out there, and that is this M2. And the main reason behind that is that video media encoder built inside it, because it changes everything. So it's definitely worth considering possibly getting, say, the new MacBook Air or the MacBook Pro with an M2 chipset inside, as I believe you'll be getting even more of your money's worth than buying that binned M1 Pro, in my opinion, in just power alone. And on that note, guys, it's time to wrap up this video. So if you have enjoyed watching it, please do press the like button. And also at the same time, guys, if you want to hear the latest Apple news, reviews like this, and comparisons, please make sure you subscribe to this channel and also hit that notification bell. Until next time, guys, I will see you really soon. Take care. Bye bye.